to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk about the Zaporozhye direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation, and this morning we got additional changes on the ground. According to several pro-Russian resources, by the morning of the 27th of July of 2025, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Plavny. So the Russians forced the Ukrainians to fall back from this area, and the Russians managed to get the southern part of the settlement of Stepnohirsk. Furthermore, the same sources reported that the Russians managed to answer the third micro-district of the Stepnohirsk. So this territory also was taken by the Russians. Currently, we have no proofs of this report, but once again, a very reliable resource published about this. As of the beginning of the 27th of July of 2025, most likely there are very heavy clashes for this territory. If the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area, this is going to become very powerful stronghold, very powerful foothold for the armed forces of the Russian Federation for further offensive operation. I'm not sure whether the Russians are going to move further in the northern part of the settlement of Stepnohirsk, but most likely the Russians will move further in the eastern and the northeastern directions with the purpose to take as many as possible tree lines and fortifications in these pockets and to get as close as possible to the city of Orechov from the west and from the northwest. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction and the Dnipropetrovsk area. According to information we have, the Russians, after a very short operational pause, continue offensive operation further in the western direction. Now it's getting more or less clear what exactly the Russians are going to do next. During the previous 12 hours, we got this video published by the Russian sources, and here we can see how Russians were attacking the settlement of Velika Mikhailovka. More precisely, in this video, we can see how Russians were attacking the bridges and supply and support roads that Ukrainians used to support their forces in the direction of the Russian offensive operation. So now let's return back to the map for the better understanding of the situation. So we have a river of Volcha, very huge problem for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This is approximately the way how the river of Volcha goes from the east in the western direction. And as you can see, this river basically cuts this territory into pieces. The northern one, it's the main part of the Dnipro region, and the southern part, it's mainly the Zaporozhye region and the most southeastern part of the Dnipro region. So, and if you remember, during the previous months, the Russians destroyed bridge in the vicinity of Andreevka-Klivtsovo. We're talking about this one. A few days later, the Russians destroyed bridges in the vicinity of Ivanovka, so it seems that the Russians are trying to cut completely the Dnipro region from the Russian forces. And now the Russians destroyed bridges in the area of Velika Mikhailovka. This is the first bridge that was destroyed during this video that we've just watched, and these are the second area that was attacked by the Russians during the same video. So now it seems that the Russians are trying to cut Ukrainians to the south of this river from supply and support, and this means that most likely the Russians of the group of forces east will continue offensive operation further in the western direction along the river of Volcha until they get the settlement of Dobropolye and until the Russians get the settlement of Gulyai-Polye from the northeast. So this is exactly what the Russians are going to do probably during the next months or two. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation for the settlement of Novopavlovka, and several neutral mappers added additional changes on the ground, according to reports that we got yesterday. If you remember, according to information we have, the group of forces east yesterday managed to secure the village of Zeleny Gai completely. So we had a video published by pro-Russian resources about this. In this video, we can see how Russians raised flags in different parts of the settlement, and today we got additional changes on the ground based on this video that were published by additional neutral mappers. Currently, there are also very heavy clashes for these pockets to the southeast of the settlement of Novopavlovka, as you can see. Despite the Russian progress on the ground along the entire line of combat contact, they still have some problems and some issues with this pocket. So the Russians we see are trying to cut this area completely and to force the Ukrainians to fall back, but at the same time we see that the Ukrainians continue showing fierce resistance.
Problem solved.
Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Currently there are very heavy clashes, and as we discussed during the previous 2 days, the most important clashes are taking place in the southern part of the city of Pokrovsk. Today we got some videos from this area and I would like to discuss them in detail. So let's take a look at the first video. And here we can see the consequences of Russian attacks that took place during the previous days. This is exactly the southern part of the city. This is exactly the gates of the city of Pokrovsk that the Russians are trying to answer from the southern part of the city. As you can see, there are lots of high storage buildings. This is a huge problem for the Russians, and the only way how to move through these high storage buildings is to destroy them and to reduce them to ruins. And this is exactly what the Russians are doing right now, trying to destroy as many as possible and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. Furthermore, during the previous 12 hours, we got this video, and here we can see the consequences of clashes for the southern and the central part of the city. As you can see, the city is covered with smoke. There are lots of fire. There are very heavy clashes. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians are now not ready to give up and to fall back from the area, because the city of Pokrovsk is a vital city for both the Russians and the Ukrainians. If the Ukrainians are able to stop and or to slow down the Russians in this area, this can become a turning point in the special military operation. The same thing for the Russian side. If the Russians are able to move through the city of Pokrovsk as soon as possible, as fast as possible, this can lead to complete collapse and the beginning of the offensive operation in the global perspective towards the city of Kharkiv from the south. So the city is covered with fire, very heavy clashes, and according to information we have, according to neutral mappers, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 26th of July, and this is the situation by the morning of the 27th of July. According to neutral mappers, the Russians improved their position significantly in the most southwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk, and the Russians continue their offensive operation. As for the northeastern flank, the sources reported that the Russians began offensive operation in the direction of this Terikon, in the direction of this elevation. So the Russians are trying to answer this territory and to establish control over this strategical point. From this perspective, the Russians will be able to establish complete control over the northeastern and the northern part of the city of Mirnograd, which will obviously ease additional progress on the ground of the armored force of the Russian Federation. During the third day in a row, we continue receiving reports that the Russians are trying to answer the settlement of Mirnograd from the south, but as for the beginning of the 27th of July, we still haven't received even a single change on map or at any mapper, and we still haven't received anything that can confirm additional progress. So let's wait and see. Obviously, these days we're not going to get lots of updates because there are very heavy clashes. It's like the situation when a wall of Russian army is fighting with the wall of Ukrainian army, and it's just it's required several days before somebody will be defeated, and then we're gonna see additional progress on the ground. But at the same time, the Russians are not waiting for the end of the battle for the Pokrovsk agglomeration. They continue offensive operation, and today we got reports that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly further in the northern direction from the area of the breakthrough. The Russians are saying that, first of all, they managed to take under complete control and to cut physically the road between the villages of Novoshachova and Shachova, so the Russians took territory, and now the Russians are trying to attack Ukrainians in the area of Shachova from the west. This is unexpected maneuver of the armored force of the Russian Federation, because the Ukrainians expected that the Russians, not just expected, the Ukrainians prepared everything that the Russians would attack Ukrainians from the south, or at least from the southeast, but the Russians outflanked Ukrainian main defense lines and now are trying to attack from the west. This can lead to complete collapse of this defense and to force the Ukrainians to fall back even further in the northern direction towards the settlement of Toretsky and Sofiivka, and this is already a very short distance to the settlement of Drushkovka. If Russians are able to get as close as possible to the settlement of Drushkovka, like this way, the Russians will be able to cut Ukrainians in the city of Konstantinovka and its contingent in Koldron. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians carry out several airstrikes in the area of Drushkovka. The sources reported that several ammo depots and warehouses were destroyed. Now let's talk about the Konstantinovka. The most important updates these days are coming, as usually, from the southern part of the Kliban-Byksky pocket. The most important updates is coming from the western flank of the Kliban-Byksky water reservoir. We are talking about this small square. Today we haven't received any map update, we haven't received any geolocation, but telling the truth, very reliable resource. Would like to point your attention once again, very reliable resource published information that the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense in this area and to cut the pocket completely. So the Russians are saying that during the previous 12 hours they managed to establish complete control over this territory. And I would like to remind you that just yesterday we got reports that the Russians secured Yablunovka, Alexandra, Kalinova. Today we got report that the Russians established control over this dense network of the fortifications, and the Russians are saying that they managed to create a cauldron, not like encirclement, not like something like wishful thinking. The Russians managed to establish complete control and to cut Ukrainian cauldron in the area of Katerinovka and Kliban-Byk. Furthermore, the sources are saying that during this period of time, the Russians were improving their positions and intensifying their offensive actions to the southwest of Katerinovka with the purpose to pin down Ukrainians and not to allow them to react on the Russian offensive further in the northeastern direction. The Russians are saying that now the Russian soldiers are trying to dig in deeper in this area because now Ukrainians realize the situation, the critical situation they appeared in, and the Russians are saying that during the previous 12 hours the Ukrainians made significant number of counterattacks from the city of Konstantinovka towards the square with the purpose to restore control with the city of Kliban-Byk and with the village of Katerinovka. But the Russians are saying that during the previous night they managed to repel every single attack that was carried out by the Ukrainians. So we believe that these coming hours and days we're going to receive lots of updates from this area, and most of them are going to be about complete disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine in this area. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Siversk. As we discussed yesterday, the Russians improved their position significantly in the Serebryanka forest. Today this information was confirmed by additional mappers. So it seems that the defense of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of the Serebryanka forest is collapsing. Most likely the Russians are about to improve their position significantly and to force the Ukrainians to fall back completely from the central eastern parts of the Serebryanka forest, and the Ukrainians would be forced to stick to the river of Seversky Donetsk, Yampolovka, Yampol, Dronovka. So the Ukrainians are about to lose control over the most important part of the forest, and they're about to leave this area completely. There are still very heavy clashes, and most likely the clashes are going to continue, but it seems that a turning point in this battle we have already passed. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just regular activities. The Russians are bombing and attacking Ukrainians. We have just small update on the ground in the area of the city of Volchansk. The Russians, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, managed to improve their positions a bit to the east of the city by taking under control additional forest belt. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.